I am still interested this evening in figuring out why locusts. We talked about this last time. We're in Revelation 9. We're on the fifth trumpet. And remember the trumpets, we looked weeks ago, trumpets were blown in the Old Testament to signify or signal war or warning, impending disaster. So we're definitely seeing that with each of these trumpets blown. That's why these are trumpets and not seals. These are trumpets. And in that first verse we saw a few weeks ago that after this fifth trumpet was blown, John saw a star that had previously fallen, and to him was given a key to the Phreatos Abuso, the bottomless pit. And he unlocked the pit, and out came the locusts. Now we have to wait until we get down to, if you can just look ahead, scan with your eyes down to verses 7 through 10. We have to wait to, or really 7 through 11, to really find out who are these locusts. We're still looking at why are there locusts. And last week I just gave you one reason. Tonight I'm going to try to give you the other two, as I see, why these creatures would appear as locusts. Last week, just to review, we spent the whole time looking at what locusts did and do in the Middle East, in the Mediterranean world, what they are like, and just the ravage they can bring upon the land, to the point that anyone who's ever experienced a locust plague and the devastation of the crop afterwards in their lifetime never forgets it. And we looked at just a handful, and there are many Old Testament passages. They're in the Old Testament, they're in the Quran, they're in the Iliad. All of your ancient writings from the Mediterranean world knew they could connect a locust plague with God being angry, whoever their God was. They knew plagues of locusts come as a sign of divine displeasure. And why would God be displeased but people have sinned? And so they knew there was a connection, and the Old Testament makes that as an explicit connection. So I'm just saying I think that's probably one of the reasons, and probably a significant reason, one of three that I'm going to give you, and someone else could maybe come up with four. But it's a significant reason why these creatures, which are not locusts, we've already kind of figured that out. We're going to figure that out more tonight and then next week. But why do they look like locusts? Why even be that? Why not be a dragonfly or beetle bug or a gnat or a frog or anything else? Why locusts? So we looked at that reason last time. Tonight, I want to come to the second reason. And for this, we're going to need to turn back to the book of Exodus. You know, even if a person has just carelessly, I would say, even carelessly, not carefully, but even if a person has carelessly read the book of Revelation and he has any Sunday school knowledge about the Old Testament, he probably can't help but think that he sees some reflections of some things that happened in Egypt and in the Exodus. I'm going to Exodus 10. Sorry to leave you hanging there. But yes, the book of Revelation regularly invites us to remember Egypt and the Exodus. It regularly invites us to remember that. And not so subtly. When we look at, and we're going to remind ourselves, we've already looked at some of the trumpet judgments before that are clearly a reflection of one of the plagues on the Egyptians. And we're seeing another one. This is my second reason I think that these creatures appear as locusts, because that was one of the most significant plagues on Egypt. You know, back when I was born in the 1950s, a movie came out in the 1950s that was, it's still being played today. It was, I think, in Technicolor. which was just fabulous because we were used to looking at everything in black and white. And so to be in cinema color or technicolor, I think was the technical phrase, was like, wow. Because in our real life, when we looked around our house and our surroundings, we saw color. But when you watch TV programs, you didn't see any color. It was all black and white. And so to come out with these big Hollywood productions in Technicolor was just a huge ordeal. And I think the leading role was played by Charlton Heston, and the backup role was played by Yul Brynner, and I don't remember who played the Queen, and I think Joshua was played by John Derek, who ended up being Bo Derek's husband many, many years later. He played the role of Joshua. But of course, the movie I'm talking about is the movie, The 10 Commandments. That was just an incredible movie, The 10 Commandments. But just as interesting, just as memorable as the 10 C's are the 10 P's, the 10 plagues on Egypt. And one of those plagues, the 8th plague, which we will see here in Exodus chapter 10, was this devastating plague of locusts. And I would say that maybe just your unchurched person, definitely at least your Sunday school educated person on the street corner in the United States, if he had to name one of the 10 plagues, I think probably 2 that would rise to the surface and go to the top would probably be the plague of the Nile being turned to blood, because that's such a memorable scene in that movie, and the other one would be the plague of locusts. They might not think of the frogs or the lice or the firstborn, but locusts, we just connect with Egypt and the Exodus and the water being turned to blood. And what have we already seen so far in chapter 8 with the trumpets? What was that first trumpet? What was the first trumpet blown? That was a hailstorm that did a lot of damage. And what was the second one? That was the meteorite that hit the salt water and did what? It turned some of it into blood. And then, as you work your way through these judgments, the trumpets, and we're going to see it again when we come to the bowls, you can't help but think the book of Exodus. You can't help but think the children of Egypt, the children of Israel in Egypt, and what God did for them to rescue them and bring them out. So if we look in chapter 10, starting with verse 12, maybe we'll read this. So I'm in Exodus, I was way over in chapter 12. In chapter 10 and verse 12, the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch your hand out over the land of Egypt for the locusts, that they may come upon the land of Egypt and eat every herb of the land, even all that the hail hath left." You see, there was a connection that hail plague came first, just like it did here with the trumpets. Moses stretched forth his rod over the land of Egypt, and the Lord brought an east wind upon the land all that day and all that night. We talked last week, I said all it takes is a shift in the direction of the wind, and the locusts who weren't there are all of a sudden there. That's how it still happens to this day. It's how it happened back then. And when it was morning, the east wind brought the locust. And the locust went up over all the land of Egypt and rested in all the coast of Egypt. Very grievous were they. Before them there was no such locust as they, neither after them shall be such. For they covered the face of the whole earth. It doesn't mean North America and South America. It means the whole land of Egypt. So that the land was darkened. That was the fourth trumpet. There was some darkness involved. And they did eat every herb of the land and all the fruit of the trees, which the hail had left. Keeps commenting on that. And it's so interesting that in our study in Revelation 9, they are clearly prohibited from eating any of the either remaining green grass or grass that has grown. And there remained not any green thing in the trees or in the herbs of the field through all the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron in haste and said, "I've sinned against the Lord your God and against you. Now therefore forgive, I pray thee, my sin, And pray that this be taken away. Verse 19, and the Lord turned a mighty strong west wind, which took away the locusts, cast them into the Red Sea, and there remained not one locust in all the coast of Egypt. But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, so that he would not let the children of Israel go. So there's this incredible experience on the nation of Egypt, the 8th of 10 plagues. And we've already talked about the hail. I think we read that, but in chapter 9, this is the 7th plague. In Exodus 9, verses 22 through 26. And then later in chapter 10, verses 21 to 23, you've got this plague of darkness. So the plagues on Egypt are something that form part of the backdrop to the story of the book of Revelation. Here, God is judging a particular nation, and when we get to, of course, the book of Revelation, the judgment of God, even if it's not global, is definitely probably more widespread than simply one nation. So in the Old Testament, these plagues and judgments they come from God because of the sin of the people. The Egyptians were great sinners because they worshiped idols in the first place. They had worshiped idols for thousands of years. You deserve to be judged for that. By the end of Revelation 9, we're going to see that's one of the reasons these plagues are coming, because people are idol worshipers. And the more immediate reason why Egypt was judged is because they were oppressing the people of God. So just keep in your mind as we continue to look at the book of Revelation that there are echoes of Exodus throughout it. Echoes of Exodus, echoes of Egypt, echoes of the plagues that God brought. And I think that is done intentionally. Of course, these locusts that we see in Revelation chapter 9, they're different than the locust here. They don't eat any vegetation. We looked at that last time. They have a different mission. They have a different prey or quarry that they are after. But the symbolism of the locust is something that is still there. These in Revelation have nothing to do with vegetation. And that's the whole surprising twist. As you start into that 5th trumpet, you're thinking locusts are going to be something similar to this 8th plague on Egypt, when really they're not. It's just that they appear like that so that our mind wanders back to the Old Testament to think of how terrible any type of locust plague was back then. It's just now the locusts are going to do something entirely different. But there was another insect that's interesting. While we're in Exodus, look over in Exodus chapter 23. There was another insect that God used that is somewhat reminiscent of what the locust, follow this train of thought, in Revelation 9 are going to be compared to here in just a moment. So I'm in Exodus 23 and verse 28. They've already been brought out of Egypt. They've already crossed the Red Sea. And now they're wondering how are they going to be able to get into the promised land. And God says he'll send 3 different things. In verse 20, he said, I'll send my angel before you. In verse 27, he said, I'll send fear. And we see that. That is explicitly said in Joshua, that God put fear in the hearts of the enemies of Israel so that they actually ended up fighting each other. And one other thing that's just barely tacked on here is in verse 28, and I will send hornets before thee, which will drive out the Hivite, the Canaanite, and the Hittite from before thee. And look over in Deuteronomy 7, where it is explained in a little more detail. In Deuteronomy 7, verses 17 through 21, it's this same pesky insect. Now look, we've all been stung by a bee, right? A bee sting does not feel good. We have beehives on our property, on our farm where we lived, and I was stung a few times this past summer trying to mow around them, and you just barely get by them, and here they come after you, and you get stung on the neck, and it hurts for a moment, but it's just a honeybee. When you get stung by a wasp or a yellow jacket, it's a lot more. I don't know what I was doing last year, but I remember in the summertime reaching under something to pick it up, and I had my fingers gripped under it, and my finger was right on top of a red wasp, and he lit me up. I mean, it is just, it's brief, doesn't last long, hold your breath for 60 seconds and it's gone, but it's a fire in the tip of your finger. It is just burning, and there's nothing you can do about it. You can't get away. There's no way to calm it down. You just have to let it run its course, and then you're fine. We're talking here in Deuteronomy about hornets. And if you've been stung by a hornet, which I have had that happen as well, unfortunately, that is very, very painful. More painful than any of these other insects that I've talked about. And God said, I'm going to send these hornets, not on every excursion into the land, but whenever He chose to do it, I'm going to send the hornets before the army, and it's going to help drive the people out. So I'm in Deuteronomy 7 and verse 17. If you say in your heart, you Israelites, getting ready to cross the Jordan and go into the promised land, well, these nations are more than I. How can I dispossess them? Thou shalt not be afraid of them, but shalt well remember what the Lord thy God did unto Pharaoh and unto all Egypt, the great temptations which thine eyes saw, and the signs and the wonders. We just read about a few of those. And the mighty hand and the stretched out arm, whereby the Lord thy God brought thee out. So shall the Lord thy God do unto all the people of whom thou art afraid. Moreover, the Lord thy God will send the hornet among them until they that are left and hide themselves from thee be destroyed. They've escaped from a battle. They're trying to hide somewhere in a rock, in a palm grove. God said, I'll send the hornets there to drive them out. Real hornets, I would probably say so. There are a lot of, you read commentaries on this and they say, well, it really doesn't mean that, but it probably does mean that. God is in control of the kingdom of insects, and it would be an excellent way to literally find any person that God wanted out of the way that had been able to hide themselves. You just send hornets after them and be stung by those hornets, and you'll beat a path to another place. And you can also read about this in Joshua 24 and verse 12, where Joshua is looking back on the experience that they've had. Joshua 24:12. So it's non-lethal, but isn't that exactly what we're going to be reading about here in Revelation 9, if you will turn back to that? I want to also, as we are looking at these two further reasons why I think locusts are used as an enemy here, I also want to try to do verses 5 and 6 so that we've got those out of our way. So let's look at Revelation 9 and verse 5. We covered 3 and 4 last time. And to them, that is to the locusts, to them it was given that they should not kill them, the same as the hornets, but that they should be tormented 5 months. And their torment was as the torment of a scorpion when he striketh a man. We'll hold off on verse 6 for a few moments. So let's think about this for a minute. If maybe we can read between the lines, these, all the way back to verse 2 in this chapter, these locusts, quote unquote locusts, we'll find out exactly what they are when we get to verses 7 to 10, as I said earlier tonight. But quote unquote, these locusts have, first, we realize, first of all, they have just now been released from being bound, held captive in a smoky pit. That's what it says. Under some form of torture or pain or discomfort. I don't know. We're not told. Maybe. Maybe not. But maybe. So if you are a creature, and this we're going to know when we get to the end of this chapter for sure, these are evil, fallen beings, created by God to be sure, but evil, fallen beings. And they have been kept in this smoky pit, the Phreatos Abusa, the bottomless pit. They've been kept there, they've been confined, not able to do what? Not able to do anything. And now they're released, if we can read between the lines, and they are evil creatures, and we'll see this more next week and the following week. These evil creatures are bent and bound on destruction. That is what they are after. And they would rather be after people than anything, because people, human beings, are image bearers. We bear the image of God. And the kingdom of darkness, which is aligned against the kingdom of God, wants nothing more than to hurt anything that it possibly can. The higher up on the chain of creation, the more satisfied they would be. And the highest thing that they can attack, they can't attack God, they can't attack another angel. The highest thing they can attack is a human being. So if I read between the lines, I'm thinking, is there frustration? These are volitional, rational, reasonable, but fallen and evil and demented created beings. They've been locked up, now that they are released, and yet they're not allowed to kill. That is a restriction, a rein, a lasso put upon them. To whom it was given that they should not kill them. That's the first thing that's told to them. You can't go out and do what no doubt they would love to do. I'm thinking ahead, and you may be in your mind too, of where we'll go here in the next few weeks when we go over to like Mark chapter 5 and on the eastern shore of the Sea of Galilee, and what happened to that group of pigs once the demons came out of a man and went into them. That's what they're bound to do. That's what their whole goal is to do. So I see frustration, if I can read between the lines on their part. They are not allowed to kill. All they're allowed to do is what? Well, let's come to the next phrase here. That they should not kill them, but that they should be tormented. So in place of murder, they're allowed to torment. Well, that's not nearly as strong of a translation as probably should be. Torment is involved, but torment is just, well, look, whenever you were a kid, and if you're an older sibling and you had younger siblings, you would hide a favorite toy or eat the last cookie. And what would that do? What would you be doing? You're tormenting your sibling. Or you would do something bad, but make sure your parents thought it was the other one that did it and let them take the fall for you. Just pure sibling torment. Not torture though, just torment. This word is a lot stronger than that. Tormenting is just aggravating or bothering someone. This word is a lot stronger. The only other time it's used here in the book, by the way, is over in chapter 20, which is interesting to see who it refers to over in chapter 20 and verse 10. It will be the same Greek word. And the devil that deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are, and shall be tortured day and night forever and ever. Now, when it's used of God, and God will be the one performing this task, it's in no sadistic sense at all. It's simply an infliction of pain as a righteous retribution upon the evil. It's going to involve pain, whether it's physical pain and or mental pain and or spiritual pain. It will be pain. And that's for a whole nother area of study, to see what all is involved in the fires of eternal hell. Because when we think of that, we think of pain, and we think of probably torture, although again, torture is a word that has this sadistic connotation to it. And God's not sadistic at all. Everything he's doing is just righteous punishment, what Satan deserved and what anyone who goes there will truly deserve. So it would better be translated, and probably some other translations will have a word that's stronger than torment. But they should be tortured for 5 months, and their torture was as the torture of a scorpion when he striketh a man. A scorpion doesn't torment you. You know, what torments you is a whole collection of flies, you know, a cloud of gnats or mosquitoes. That's what torments you. They don't torture you, though. The scorpions and what these will be doing is on a higher level than being bothered by a cloud of gnats around you. So you have a picture. You have a picture with you. You have a couple of them with you tonight. And you might want to begin, especially the first one, with a picture of the locusts. You might want to take a look at that and begin to familiarize yourself with that. That's going to become very important for next week when we get to verses 7 through 10. But already we're introduced to the second figure we'll talk about here in a moment, and that is the scorpion. And you know, this locust, the locust in this judgment or plague are compared to scorpions, but this comparison was very slow in developing. In verse 3, the only thing we know in verse 3, they came out of the smoke locust, to them was given power as the scorpions of the earth have power. Watch how slowly developing their connection to a scorpion is. First of all, it's power in verse 3. In verse 5, it is striking power. And it's not until we get to verse 10 that really the connection is made. It's striking power because of the sting or because of the stinger in their tail. So there's what the locust looks like. You've got a picture of this. It looks like a grasshopper. But look at his head. That's going to become important later on. Look at his head, and then we will be given more features next week. And then if you look at your second picture, quite a bit different. But somehow this locust, or these locusts, also have a tail, which, you know, your locust picture, he doesn't have a tail. They also have a tail. Verse 10, they had tails like unto scorpions. There is the like unto scorpion. They have that arched tail, probably over their back, with a stinger in it. So a few comments about scorpions. It's a little 4-inch, although your picture is huge. It's way bigger than that. They're not that big. A little 4-inch long, lobster-like. I mean, look at him. He looks like a lobster. A little desert creature. He's got 8 legs. He's got 2 little pinchers. And then what he's so famous for, not the pinchers, that's what he holds his prey with so that he can sting them. But he's not going to hold a human. He's only going to be able to hold little creatures that he's after. It's that tail that arches up over his back with that stinger in it, with a venomous barb in it. There are hundreds of species. There are only a handful of them that are deadly. Some of them don't even bother a person at all. The ones that do, if you get stung, it's painful, it's poisonous. It'll go away in a couple of days. There are only a few species that are deadly. And where we see them in the Old Testament is, we'll turn back there. We'll go back to the law of Moses, back to Deuteronomy chapter 8. Where we see them used in the Old Testament is as a symbol for evil that's lying in wait. Even though there were definitely real scorpions, there definitely were real scorpions, they are often used as a symbol of evil because they're not out in the open. They're under rocks. They're under a bush. They're in the chinks of the stone of a rock wall or in a rock building. And when you least expect and you sit down and you brush your hand up against it, then they come out and strike you. It's not like they see you and they chase you down on the desert floor or something. They come by surprise. So in Deuteronomy 8 and verse 3, Moses said, "Thou shalt remember all the way which the Lord thy God led thee these 40 years in the wilderness, to humble thee and to prove thee and to know what was in thine heart, whether thou wouldest keep his commandments or not." That was verse 2. Verse 3, "And he humbled thee and suffered thee to hunger, fed thee by manna, which thou knewest not, neither thy fathers, that he might make thee know that man doth not live by bread only, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God doth man live." And then in verse 15, "Who led thee through that great and terrible wilderness," the one we just read about in verses 2 and 3. "Who led you through that great and terrible wilderness, wherein were fiery serpents and scorpions, and drought, and where there was no water, and who brought forth water out of the rock." And then if you will flip over to Luke chapter 10, I think I quoted some of these verses last time. All we need, I think, is that 19th verse. Here, some of the disciples that Jesus had sent out, having given them power to cast demons out, they came back rejoicing that the demons were subject to them because of the authority Jesus had given them. And then he said in verse 19, "Behold, I give you power to tread on serpents and scorpions." Now, because of the fact that they had just come back having been successful in exorcism, these two words, serpent and scorpions, are probably a reference to evil spirits and evil powers. I'm sure they also could have some secondary reference to a literal serpent or scorpion, because Paul was bit by a serpent, by a snake in Acts 28, and he shook it off. It was a viper. Shook it off in the fire. It did him no harm. So I'm sure it has or can have reference to that. But in the context here, it's obviously a symbol for evil spirits, for Satan's powers, for the locusts. That's what we're talking about. And he said, "I give you power to tread on serpents and scorpions and over all the power." Those are two different Greek words too. The first is really not power. I give you, that's exousia. I give you authority. I give you the authority to tread on serpents and scorpions and over all the dunamis. That's a different Greek word. All the power that the enemy has, I give you authority over their power. I give you authority over their power. And who's he talking about? Serpents and scorpions, Satan and evil spirits. Because in verse 17, they said, "Lord, even the demons are subject to us through your name." And he said, "It's no surprise, because when I sent you out, I gave you authority over them, and you were able to cast them out of people." And we're going to look at that more next week and the weeks to come as well. So I think the locusts are more a symbol for judgment on sin, and the scorpions are symbols of evil that lies in wait. Let me come to the third reason tonight why I think locusts appear at all. And for this, we're going to need to turn back. We've been looking at the law. Now we'll go to the prophets and the little prophecy of Joel. Here's a third reason why I think that these creatures, when they appear, they're definitely demonic, who come out of the bottomless pit. Why, when John first sees them, he thinks locusts. I think there's symbolism involved. The first reason I said it's just a symbol of the sinful humanity that's in the world, and God is going to judge them. Secondly, remember what God did with the plagues on the Egyptians. And then thirdly, this little prophecy of Joel, 3 chapters in the English Bible, 4 chapters in the Hebrew Bible, is all about locusts. The whole first chapter is about an historical and historic, literal locust plague, the likes of which they had never heard of before. And he said, "You'll tell generations to come about this literal locust plague that came on Israel. No doubt, we're back to the first reason I said last week, no doubt because of their sins. God sent a literal, and we read those passages where he said in Deuteronomy, if you don't follow my commandments, you can expect these curses, and one of those was the locust. So look in Joel chapter 1, we'll just start with verse 1. The word of the Lord that came to Joel, the son of Pethuel. Hear this. Watch these first few verses. Hear this, ye old men, and give ear, all ye inhabitants of the land. Hath this been in your days, or even in the days of your fathers? What he's getting ready to recount, he said, have you ever experienced anything like this before? Or did your father or grandfather ever tell you of a story this horrific? Tell ye your children of it, and let your children tell their children, and their children another generation. And here's the story you're to tell. That which the palmer worm hath left, hath the locust eaten. That which the locust hath left, hath the cankerworm eaten. And that which the cankerworm hath left, hath the caterpillar eaten. I told you last time that biblical Hebrew has 9 different words. They were so obsessed with the fear and the problem of a locust plague. 9 different words to describe a locust. Either different stages from immature to adult, or different colors. When that chemical in their brain changes, they actually change colors as well. And we talked all about that last week. That's when they begin to become very gregarious. Prior to that, they're just solitary insects. They begin to breed rapidly, and then they begin to swarm.
They're more aggressive, right?
And they're very aggressive.
Like each individual one, something's changed in it.
Something changes.
So it's more aggressive. Not like a grasshopper.
Not like our little lonely grasshopper who's sitting there by himself and not in a swarm. And look how this is going to affect the people. Look at verse 5. Joel's prophecy is just simply fascinating. Awake, ye drunkards, and weep, and howl, ye drinkers of wine. Why is he saying that? He's talking to the alcoholics in Israel, because once the locusts get through with their job, there'll be no more vineyards, there'll be no more grapes, there'll be no more wine. He said, howl because of the new wine, for it is cut off from your mouth. For a nation is come upon my land. This is God, Yahweh, speaking through his prophet. This is God's land, strong and without number, whose teeth are the teeth of a lion. We're going to see that in Revelation 9. And he hath the cheek teeth of a great lion. And he hath laid my vine waste, and barked my fig tree. He hath made it clean bare, and cast it away. The branches thereof are made white. You know, they've not only eaten the leaves, they ate the bark off the tree. And so when all the bark is gone, then you just have what? You just have that white tree. So everything is stark. This was a real historic locust plague that was unprecedented whenever it hit Israel. And so God's called the prophet Joel into ministry, and he's using this one event to develop his whole 3-chapter prophecy. And all of chapter 1 is about, well, until you get to verse 15, and then he's jumping into the day of the Lord. But it's all about a real locust plague. And he goes on in verse 8, lament like a virgin girded with sackcloth for the husband of her youth. She was ready to be married, but the marriage is never going to happen. The wedding won't happen, and the marriage will not be consummated because there's death in the land. And you just find this all the way through this chapter, all the way through chapter 1. And then when you get to chapter 2, God has used something that was historic and real, and it actually happened. And then in chapter 2, he's going to talk about another great army that he is going to send into the land of Israel. Now, I don't mean to imply or for you to walk away thinking that those locusts in Revelation 9 are these armies referred here in chapter 2. They're not. I'm simply saying that the locusts in chapter 1 of Joel are used in an eschatological sense for a future army in chapter 2, just used as a prelude to a much more devastating attack against Israel. And we have earlier looked at some of these verses, a lot of these. We've looked at the end of verse 1 of chapter 2. Yom Yahweh cometh, it's nigh at hand. He describes it a day of darkness and gloominess and clouds and thick darkness. And then he goes on to describe this army, but it's all in symbolic language. In verse 4, the appearance of them is as the appearance of horses. We're going to see that in Revelation 9. And as horsemen, we're going to see that in Revelation 9. So shall they run. Like the noise of chariots on the tops of mountains, so shall they leap. We're going to see that in Revelation 9. Before their face the people will be pained. All faces shall gather blackness. They'll run like mighty men. They'll climb the wall. If this doesn't sound like a real bug, although it isn't, like men of war, and they shall march every one on his ways, and they shall not break their ranks. Verse 9, they'll run to and fro in the city. They'll run up on the wall. They'll climb up on the houses. They will enter in at the windows like a thief. The earth will quake before them. The heavens will tremble. And now you can see how this becomes so eschatological. The sun and the moon shall be dark, and the stars shall withdraw their shining, and the Lord will utter his voice before his army. The end of verse 11, for the day of the Lord is great and very terrible, and who can abide it? And you know, you recognize those verses. We've looked at those verses before. God is just bringing all of this Old Testament symbolism to bear on the last days. So a real insect plague of locusts in Joel 1, not a real plague of locusts, but a plague of another sort in chapter 2. And I think that also, both of those form part of the backdrop to the symbolism of Revelation chapter 9.
I have a question. In Joel 2, is there kind of like a dual meaning, dual interpretation of what we're in Joel 2 verse 1 through 11? Part of the fulfillment of that prophecy was what happened with the nation of Babylon. They fit the description of some of these judgments.
They do.
In the way that they just came and overtook Israel and they didn't care about mercy or pity. But they also fit, what also fits this description are these locusts in Revelation 9. And so is this prophecy supposed to be interpreted dually? Part of the fulfillment was in Babylon. He's prophesying that a nation's going to come on you and judge you. And he's also promising to the generations that are around when the day of the Lord is near, which is at the end of time, what's going to happen to them as well. The same prophecy applied to both ways.
I don't really think that prophecy has anything to do with the locust of Revelation 9, because I don't think these are necessarily directed against Israel. I think they're directed against a third of mankind or a fourth of mankind, or they're just directed. I think that the real fulfillment of Joel 2 is even after Revelation 9, is not Babylon, is even a future invasion of the land of Israel. And you can see some things that are very similar to what you read in Joel 2 over in Ezekiel chapters 38 and 39.
And do you believe that because of what it says at the end of those verses about the sun and the moon being darkened?
Exactly.
We don't see those darkened with the Revelation 9.
Exactly. It's just like typological. It's a symbol of something that is greater and still yet to come.
Okay. You answered my question, which mainly was, could it be applied to Revelation 9 locusts? You don't think?
I don't think so. I just think as we read Revelation 9 and we see these locusts and we see the damage that we're doing, not that they're a fulfillment of Joel 1 or Joel 2, but I think in our mind, we should go back to the plagues on Egypt And we should go back to Joel and go, yes, this is not a fulfillment of that, but maybe that is why these creatures that have come out of the bottomless pit have the appearance of locusts. Because there has to be a reason for that. There has to be a meaning, and that meaning is to remind us, yes, that this is going to be a judgment against these sinful people in the world. So then if you'll go back to Revelation, let's see, chapter 9, let's see if we can do verse 6, and then I have one more little theme to deal with before we wrap up tonight. So in verse 6 in Revelation 9, this is interesting. This is interesting. It says, in those days shall men seek death and shall not find it, and shall desire to die, and death shall flee from them. By the way, maybe don't leave Joel yet, or if you have, go back there, because I need a couple of verses in the next chapter, in Joel 3. You know, Revelation, so much of it, in the sections in which we are now, are simply John is just repeating what he saw or what he heard. If he saw something, he says, this is what I saw. If he heard something, he says, this is what I heard. And we're told in the beginning part of chapter 9, I saw this star that had fallen earlier. Some unnamed figure gave him a key, and then I saw him open the pit, and then I saw smoke come out, and then I saw locusts come out. He saw all this. He heard a lot of things, but verse 6 rings differently. This is very reminiscent of the Old Testament prophets foretelling future events. Look at Joel 3:1. While you're looking at that, I'm going to read Revelation 9:6 again. And in those days shall such and such happen. Joel 3:1. For behold, in those days will such and such happen. And in verse 18, and it will come to pass in that day, or in those days, the mountains will drop down sweet wine. I think here in Revelation 9:6, John more or less is taking on the role of a prophet. How can he know what's going to happen as an effect of being stung by these locusts? How can he know what people will think or feel? I mean, he could guess. I don't think he's guessing at all. I think he has taken on the role or the mantle of a prophet, and he is predicting in verse 6, just like the Old Testament prophets predicted. Once these locusts do their thing, and that is they have a stinger in their tail, and once they begin to torment men, John knows they're not going to die, because that's already been told. They're not going to die. Well, what is going to happen as a result? John's predicting how men will react to the sting of the locust. It's going to stop short of death, but men are going to agonize in pain. And you know, most of the previous judgments, or maybe not most, but at least a lot of them, we've seen death. The seals, the 4 horsemen, was war, then famine, then disease, and wild beasts. And the 4th one said 1/4 of the people were killed. In the trumpets, the first trumpet doesn't say anyone was actually killed. They might have been. The second trumpet, the meteorite that hit the salt water, it said 1/3 of the ships were destroyed, and people are on ships. We know people died then. The third trumpet, when the wormwood came and did its thing, we know people died there. Most of the earlier judgments, people have actually died. This one is interesting because it explicitly said that people aren't going to die. But John understands what they're going to feel. And he said men will hope to die. They will wish to die. They will seek death. And it's like an illusion. They run after it to try to grab it, but it will run away from them. I described earlier when I had been stung by that wasp. It lit my finger up for 60 seconds and maybe for 2 minutes, and then you're just rubbing it, shaking it, and before you know it, the effect is gone. And I'm definitely not seeking to die, wishing I would die because this hurts so much. That's why it's not torment. That's why it's torture, what the people are going to experience whenever they're stung In those days, men will seek death and will not find it, and they will desire to die, and death will flee from them. We know that the attack lasts 5 months. Twice we're told it lasts 5 months. I don't know that we know how long their pain will continue. I don't know that we know, are they stung more than once? I just know from what the passage says that this is a demonic assault that's going to last for 5 months. And then what happens after 5 months? Well, you would just have to hypothesize, but these creatures are probably put back into the pit from which they came. With this short period of time we have left tonight, there is one theme that I have wanted to talk about, and I've either got to put it in now or save it for another place. And in light of that 6th verse, that the torture will be so intense that people will long for death. Most of us have never experienced anything like that and never will. And very few human beings have, but there are a few people who have been in such pain that they would rather be dead than alive. That's what he's saying. They'd rather be dead than alive. But God won't let them die. So that's pretty horrific stuff. This chapter is, way beyond the 4 horsemen and way beyond the environmental, ecological disasters.
No, that was pretty intense.
That was pretty intense. This is way beyond that for the people that are affected. So, before we get too afraid of the content of this chapter, and we haven't gotten to the 6th trumpet yet, before we get too afraid of the content of this chapter, let me call your attention to a dominant, recurring theme. We've seen it before. I've mentioned it before, but it's really highlighted in this vision. And we're going to go back and look at it again through verses 1 through 5. And that is what I could write up here on the board. I didn't even use the board tonight, but I would write up here that everything is under complete divine control.
Yeah.
None of these evil beings possess anything of their own. They have no say-so, they have no rights, they have no authority, they have nothing. They cannot operate autonomously. Even Satan does not operate autonomously. God is in control of him, his fallen comrades. God is in control of that whole realm. God is the one, through his prophets, predicting everything that's going to happen in the exact way it's going to happen. And even the end result. Jesus said in Matthew 25 that hell was prepared with the devil and his angels in mind. That is complete divine control. That's Matthew 25:41. Hell was made for the devil and his angels. So what we have here in this chapter is permission, is direction, is I'll let you go so far and no further. Restrictions, loaning. I think Satan is loaned the key to the bottomless pit, but he has to give it back, because in chapter 20, that angel in heaven has that key and comes down and unlocks the pit again. It's the same pit, chapter 9 and verse 1 and chapter 20 and verse 1. So Satan, even though he is powerful, the Bible tells us he's on a leash, and that God has the other end of the leash. So I want to give you here in closing tonight, from these verses, I want you to see how heavily it's underscored here. And I think in me saying this, you're going to remember, oh, you've mentioned that before. It's all of these times when it says, and such was given. Was given by whom? It never says by whom. Well, we know exactly by whom. It's been given by God. So I'm going to give you 7 indications in these 5 verses of the divine, absolute, divine, complete control that God has over all of this, lest we be afraid when we read a chapter like this. So first of all, I'm going to give you 7 of these. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, 7 of these. First of all, in verse 1, God is the one who initiates all of this by giving that key to the fallen star. He's the one who set all of this in motion. You know, he's the one who made sure the angels have the trumpet. He's the one who makes sure the angels blow their trumpets in the proper order. He's the one who, once this angel blows the trumpet, then he makes sure that this key is given. But it's just a loan. Because as I said, in chapter 20 and verse 1, we see it back in the hands of God by the end of the book. So Satan uses it, and then God takes it back. A second indication is in verse 3. God delegates a certain power to these locusts. And there came out of the smoke locusts upon the earth, and unto them was given. That is the recurrent theme in these first few verses, lest any of God's people be terrified because of the sinful people who will be terrorized by these creatures. We have nothing to worry about or fear. God delegates this power to these locusts. Then in verse 4, notice the phrase again, and it was commanded them. They are literally on a leash, and God's holding the other end. God prohibits the destruction of any more vegetation. And then in the end of that verse, God identifies, if you can't eat grass, what's your target? It was commanded them that they should not hurt the grass of the earth, neither any green thing nor either tree. Only those men. In other words, commanded, don't hurt those, but you can hurt these. So he identifies, God identifies the locust target. And of course, in the process of that, who's off limits? In verse 5, God limits their activity to torture only. We see this in verse 5. And to them it was given that they should be tortured for 5 months. You have to supply the verb there yourself. And then in the 6th place, God limits the time duration. He does it there, and he does it later in this section as well for 5 months. And then the 7th thing that we see through all this is God prevents him from actually killing any people. Because as I said earlier tonight, no doubt, I have no doubt at all that if God was not in control, if there was not some limit or, you can go this far and no further upon these locusts, they would simply kill all the people that they could kill.
Like they did those pigs when they went.
Like they did that herd of swine, which we will be reading in depth and making a connection with all of that back to where we are right now to understand these are evil creatures, obviously. These are not locusts. They're not bugs. They're not insects. They're evil creatures. But I had to first of all get out of the way, well then why does he talk about them as locusts if that's not what they really are? But they are directing their energy and their torture against the unsaved part of humanity, the people who are not the people of God, and they are not directing them toward God's people. So, as you read the book of Revelation, there's simply nothing to fear. Again, if you just look through those verses and see it was commanded them, and it was commanded them, and it was given them, and it was given them, they possess nothing of their own.
The only one we should be fearing.
The only one you should fear is God, the one who not only could torture and torment, but as the Gospels say, who can throw body and soul into hellfire. We have nothing to fear with them. We sang a few weeks ago, didn't we, the great hymn, Mighty Fortress is Our God. How does that line go in there? And though this world with demons filled should threaten to undo us, we will not fear, for God hath willed his truth to triumph through us. Martin Luther, who wrote that, was struggling with demonic, satanic forces that were aligned against him. The prince of darkness grim, we tremble not for him. His rage we can endure because we know his doom is sure. One little word shall fell him. You know, I brought that when I went away to seminary back in the mid 1980s. We were not singing a lot of hymns in our church. We sang a few, but not a lot. And that was one of the hymns that I just, I knew it from childhood, but I had forgotten it. And I brought it from seminary back to church so we could sing that. What a powerful force in the Christian's life to know these are horrible creatures, just let loose. But as the song said, though this world is filled with demons, we do not have to be afraid. Because of what Jesus said in Luke chapter 10, he said, I've given you authority to tread on serpents and scorpions. You do not have to be afraid of them. That cannot be said of these people here in Revelation chapter 9.
The church is one foundation, is Jesus Christ her Lord. She is a new creation by water and the word. From them he came and sought her to be his holy bride. With his own blood he bought her, and for her life he died. Amen. Elect from every nation, yet one o'er all the earth. Her charter of salvation, one Lord, one faith, one birth. One holy name she blesses, partakes one holy food, and through one hope she presses, with every grace endued. The church shall never perish, her dear Lord to defend, who guides, sustain, and cherishes with her to the end. Though there be those who hate her, all signs within her pale. Against those foe and traitor, she ever shall prevail. Though with a scornful wonder men see her sore oppressed, by schism rent asunder, by heresies distressed, yet saints their wants are keeping, their bridles up how long, and soon the night of weeping shall be the morning song. With toil and tribulation and tumult of her war, she waits the consummation of peaceful